Hello, hello. I'm Casey,
And I'm Fallon.
and this is Render the Darkness, true crime paranormal podcast.
Woo.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, we have been doing what we've referred to as a 50 state series, where we do at least one true crime and one paranormal slash folklore slash cryptid case out of every state. We're on Michigan. So I am going to be covering the true crime case out of Michigan. And I will tell you ahead of time that this is a very sad, tragic, and heartbreaking case. It's a two-parter. We haven't done a two-parter in a long time, but I really wanted to do this case justice. It's still considered one of the worst cases in the entire United States. So there's a lot to cover, which is why it's two parts. And I will let you know that it does involve crime against children, as well as animals. So if those are things that you are sensitive to, there is a trigger warning for this case. And the case is on the Bath School disaster. So this event took place on May 18th, 1927. Let's start by talking about the town for a few minutes. Part one is mostly going to be about the school and its history and kind of the build up to the events. So part one doesn't really have a trigger warning to it, so you can stay for that. Part two is where the trigger warning comes into play, because that's where we're going to be actually talking about the events of the case. Also, I will let you know I've been sick for about 7 days now, so if I sound nasally or if I have to cough while I'm talking, I apologize. So, at the time, there was around 300 adult residents, and the town was considered a civil township. And although the town was mostly agriculture, in 1922, the voters of the town approved the creation of a school district, which, great, awesome, right?
Yep.
Well, what happens usually when an expensive building is approved in a town, especially a small town, especially back then, is that along with the approval of something like a school build came a pretty hefty tax increase on property, so the building could be funded. Taxpayers essentially funded it.
Oh, gotcha.
I mean, it's the same now, but it really hit hard back then. When the school was finally opened between first grade and the 12th grade, there was a total of 236 students that would be enrolled. Although this, again, was a really, really good thing, it was ultimately pretty controversial because of the property tax spike, which was pretty high. This sort of puts us on the path of the events to the day that we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, let's talk about a man by the name of Andrew Philip Kehoe. His parents' names were Philip and Mary Kehoe. He was one of 13 children. After graduating high school, he went on to attend Michigan State College, also known as Michigan State University, where he studied electrical engineering. He'd been interested in electrical engineering since he was a kid on his father's farm, where he would often tinker with the equipment and stuff like that on the farm, so he could kind of get a better understanding of how everything worked. He had a really curious mind. And that interest definitely carried over into adulthood for Andrew, and not just in electrical engineering, but just anything mechanical.
Nice.
This is also where he would meet his future wife, Ellen Nellie Price. They didn't know that part yet, but it is important to note that Nellie's uncle was not only wealthy, but also very involved in politics, which becomes important later. But for now, Andrew and Nellie only dated. Once Andrew graduated, he began working as an electrical lineman in St. Louis, Missouri. This is where he was in 1911 when he suffered a severe head injury and was in a coma for 2 full weeks.
Dang.
And if we haven't learned anything from all the true crime cases in the world, we've learned A, people are nuts and can be awful, and B, a large percentage of true crime cases involve a head injury, which I feel safe to say is probably not a coincidence.
I was going to ask a minute ago whenever you said his name, I was like, oh, is this guy going to be a good guy or a bad guy? I'll just wait. I'm assuming he's not a good guy.
Definitely a bad guy. Like the worst of the worst guys. So due to his head injury, he was forced to move back in with his father, which wasn't great because during the time Andrew was out trying to make a life for himself, his father had remarried due to Andrew's mother having passed away, and Andrew was not fond of his new stepmother. Her name was Frances Wilder. However, Frances wouldn't be a problem for long because it just so happened that on September 17th, 1911, so the same year as his head injury, when Frances went to light the family stove, it exploded, soaking her in fuel, catching her on fire. In an attempt to help her, Andrew threw a bucket of water on her, which did not help her because the fire and fuel were oil-based. Frances would pretty quickly die from being on fire, and there was definitely some speculation that this may not have been as quote-unquote accidental as it might have appeared. Some people thought the stove may have been messed with, and knowing what he goes on to do later, I'm inclined to kind of lean that way myself. After this, Nellie and Andrew would rekindle their relationship and go on to get married in 1912. 7 years later, in 1919, after her wealthy Uncle Lawrence Price passed away, Andrew and Nellie would purchase 80 acres of farmland from Nellie's aunt. Lawrence, as I mentioned earlier, was heavy into politics. He was even nominated for U.S. Senate as a Democratic candidate. He lost, but still, that shows how involved in politics he was before he passed away. As for Andrew and who he was as a person, he was described in a lot of different ways. Some said he was...
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Bless you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Some said he was intelligent. He was also described as angry and impatient. He was described as eccentric and very particular about his clothes. They had to be... I'm so sorry, I feel a sneeze coming on. Fallon passed it over to me. But he was very particular about his clothes. They had to be neat and clean at all times, which by this point, Andrew was a farmer, so not really a common behavior for a farmer back in those days.
No.
Like, he was to the point where he would stop midday and go change his shirt.
And go back out and farm?
Like, he farmed in a suit and smoked cigars. Like,
That don't seem appropriate.
Like, it was very, very unusual for that day and age. I mean, it would be unusual now to see a farmer in, like, a three-piece suit driving their tractor. But it was really unusual back then. So he was also described as someone who did love children. He was also by some described as very kind and very polite. But no matter who described him in a positive way or a negative way, nobody could deny his intelligence. He was really smart. But he was also described as someone who could hold a grudge and could be vengeful at times. A couple examples of that would be after Andrew's father passed away, before they bought Lawrence's farm, Andrew and Nellie's church was torn down. when the attendees of the congregation were posed with a fee for a new church, their portion was $400. Andrew would essentially just ignore the bill, even snubbing the priest's attempt to collect and leaving the congregation altogether as a result. In another instance, Andrew thought his neighbor had shorted him on the purchase of livestock, so what Andrew decided to do in response was buy 8 steers from said neighbor and pin the steers in a clove field. 2 of the 8 would die, and Andrew would harvest the steers and sell their hides. After which, Andrew went back to the neighbor demanding half of his money back, and the neighbor refused. Although this it didn't really create that much animosity between the men, because when they did go on to buy Lawrence's property, they put their property up for sale, and the neighbor that this happened with is actually the guy who would go on to buy their farm.
Oh.
Although Andrew was very petty about it. He was like, I don't want this guy to have a single blade of grass that he did not pay for. So he was like, I'm taking everything that this guy did not pay for. But another thing that's important to mention was Andrew's unusual farming practices. If he needed a hole dug or a trunk removed, he would just use dynamite, which kind of caught the neighbors. Yeah, it was a highly unusual practice for the time.
Yeah.
But it did catch the neighbors' attention.
Yeah, I bet. Pretty sure I looked at the window a couple times if I heard dynamite going off. Like, what?
Well, yeah, some were intrigued by it, and others kind of had a different outlook on it. They felt like the practice was pretty reckless and dangerous.
Yeah.
Which, agree.
Very much so, yeah.
So, eventually, though, these types of techniques would actually gain him respect from the locals. Because they kind of felt like he was showing them work harder, work smarter, not harder, kind of a way to go about things.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And, he was also known to volunteer, and he would often speak at things like the Farm Bureau meetings. So, he too was slowly starting to step into, the political part of the whole town and really kind of get involved in all of that. All that being said, now we're going to go talk about the connection between Andrew and the school. In 1924, due to his innate ability to pristinely record all money, to the last farthing, he was very exact, very on top of the books. So due to that skill, as well as his mechanical and electrical skills and knowledge, when a seat opened up, Andrew was elected treasurer of the Bathhouse Consolidated School Board.
Okay.
And the biggest thing Andrew fought for while on the board was lower taxes.
Oh, nice.
At
the moment, nice.
He was also constantly at odds with the other board members. He was prone to throw tantrums if he didn't get his way, and he regularly voted against the other board members, and frequently called for adjournment, which means either a recess or a postponement, intermission, suspension, whatever you want to say. And his being so confrontational is often what's credited as the reason he would go on to lose the 1925 election for township clerk, and when he ran for the county justice of peace a few years later, it was credited mostly as the reason that he lost that election as well. And literally every other election he would go on to try to run for. Nobody wanted him. And there he was pretty cantankerous.
Nobody wanted him.
They didn't.
Yeah.
So let's dive into what may have really started triggering Andrew's disdain for the school. It started with the building of the school in general, but once Andrew joined the school board, he was a little at ease about that and a little more confident because he felt like that would give him an opportunity to have a little more say over where the money went and how much was spent.
Okay. I can see his thinking behind that, but...
That kind of all got smashed when a man by the name of Emery Emory Eli Hook came along and became superintendent of the Bath Consolidated School. Despite the fact that Emory did his best to delegate the school funds as smartly as he could, Andrew felt that every decision Emory made was a money grab. And again, where did that money come from? Taxpayers. So they were kind of working against each other because Emory was kind of spending the funds and Andrew was trying to stop the spending of the funds.
Right.
So they didn't really, they didn't jihad.
No. I could see
So,
that.
like I said, needless to say, Andrew was not a fan of Emory. He even went so far as trying to get Emory banned from school board meetings, which literally never would have happened because Emory, of course, had to attend them because he was the superintendent.
I was gonna say, I mean, as long as he's using the money for, things that need to be done.
Well, that was the thing. That was the debate, was did they really need the things he was delegating the money to? So, eventually, Andrew would kind of win in his mind a little bit when he was able to gain the votes to reduce Emory's vacation time and his income, at least for a little bit. So that kind of appeased Andrew, temporarily.
Man, they took his money and his vacation.
He felt like he kind of bested him, I
guess.
guess.
Man.
So Andrew was also super against all of the nepotism that existed amongst the board. That's pretty common in a small town, I feel like. But a lot of the school's jobs and contracts were given to the board's family members first, regardless of actual qualifications, or in some cases higher bids for contracts.
But who you know, it's kind of still like that today.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like that's a pretty common even today.
Yeah.
So all of Andrew's attempts to go against the school board would eventually cause all of Andrew's wins on the board to kind of be demoted. And eventually in 1926, all of his efforts would feel like they'd been reversed when Emory got a raise from the $100 Andrew fought for to the $200 Andrew fought against.
Oh, wow.
And as Emory continued to try to improve the school with better supplies, better books, and better building improvements, Andrew got madder and madder at the cost of all of this. What it would be, what it would cost the taxpayers, and how blindly Emory seemed to just be spending their money. So eventually his political position was kind of disregarded, but his skill as an electrician and a mechanic was still very much needed at the school. So he ended up kind of being over the bulk of the maintenance of the school.
Okay.
Yeah, so because of this new role, Andrew not only had access to the school 24/7, but it also allowed him to learn every corner of the school. In it, above it, underneath it, he learned it. Andrew would later suffer another pretty significant head injury in mid-1926 when he was out working in his grove and a tree broke.
Oh no.
Another important thing to note is that by this point, Nellie, his wife, had fallen very ill and couldn't really leave the house unless it was to go to a hospital, which she had to go to quite often, and sometimes that was for weeks at a time.
Oh, dang. Poor lady.
And then there's the fact that Andrew and Nellie hadn't made a mortgage payment since April of 1921.
And it was what year now?
We're now in fall of 1926.
Oh my gosh. I'm surprised they actually let him go that long. That is crazy.
Well, I mean, it was her uncle's property and estate. So.
Oh, okay.
And that's that's despite Nellie finally being given some of her inheritance from her uncle's estate. And so she, in 1925, received $1,200. And in March of 1926, Nellie was set to receive another inheritance check for $500, but instead it was applied to their mortgage debt.
Understandable.
Nellie was grateful and wanted to set the debt right. Her husband, however, felt very different. He felt that the money was their money to delegate how they saw fit. Andrew promptly contacted a lawyer, and in August of 1926, they sat before a judge. They initially lost. The judge did agree that Nellie should have been the one to choose where to put the money, but also he felt that putting it towards their mortgage was kind of the best thing to do, since they were years behind at this point. But Andrew protested against the decision, and in the end, the couple would leave with their $500 check. Okay, so when that happened, this led the attorney who was representing the estate, his name was Joseph H. Dunback. So sorry about that. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty. The camera stopped recording. So, we're just going to pick right back up where that cut us off. So, I think we had just gotten into Joseph H. Dunback, which was the attorney who was representing the estate for Nellie's uncle. So he had filed a foreclosure. And after he filed the motion, he ran into Nellie's sister, who convinced him to withdraw it due to Nellie's fragile and failing health, which he agreed to do. But unfortunately, Nellie and Andrew had already received the foreclosure notice before this little exchange. And so, just now to be clear, when Joseph sent that foreclosure, he never ever intended to actually evict the couple. It was meant more so to just kind of motivate them to kind of come in and set up a payment plan of some sort. But Andrew was absolutely enraged at this foreclosure notice, and his immediate thought was that if he hadn't been paying the school tax, he could have afforded his mortgage.
I have a feeling he probably still wouldn't pay it.
Well, considering you got money multiple times and fought against paying it with one of those checks, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're right. I don't think he would have paid it regardless, but that's not the way his little brain ticked. So, this was kind of believed to be Andrew's last straw before everything that had been weighing on him over the years, it just kind of seemed to explode. So, between the mortgage, the taxes, Nellie's failing health, his failed political attempts, his hatred of Emory, the school board battles he faced over and over, and his multiple head injuries, he just kind of snapped at this point. And in November of 1926, that is believed to be when Andrew really began implementing his plan. He purchased 2 boxes of dynamite. A few days later, he bought blasting caps and more dynamite. And in December, he would purchase a Winchester rifle and about 100 rounds of ammunition. On December 31st, he set off the dynamite on his farm, which most people that heard it just kind of assumed it was Andrew celebrating the new year. But it was actually Andrew practicing setting off dynamite by way of a preset timer.
Oh, no.
Now we're going to fast forward about a year. On May 14th, there was a bridge in Bath being worked on, and the construction crew noticed a large amount of dynamite had gone missing from the back of their truck.
Uh-oh.
And that takes us to May 18th, 1927, which is the day of the event. And that is going to end part 1. Part 2, we will actually talk about the day of the event. And again, I'm going to say now, and I will say it again when we record that part, or when you watch that part, or listen to that part, whatever it may be, there will be a trigger warning on that case, on that part of the case. It does involve children, it does involve animals. So hopefully you will be there for part 2, and hopefully you stuck around for the full part 1 and you enjoyed it.
There's definitely a lot of information, and I'm kind of scared to see where this is going to go. I mean, I know it's true crime, so I know it's not going to be good, but
we just, for this part, it was important to understand the layout of who Andrew was.
Right.
So I think we've covered that pretty clearly. We've covered the history of the school enough to understand it. We've covered a couple of the key players in it. So
Yeah.
We'll see you guys on part 2.
Bye.